Steven, first off, I'm sure you've already heard from your sound team and your VFX team, and I think Claudia as well. But big congratulations to everyone. It looks like F1 had a pretty good day with the Oscar shortlist. Did you see that?
Yes, this is fantastic. Yeah, really, really excited for all of them. Definitely.
Yeah, it's obviously well deserved. There's not a editing shortlist. There hasn't been since 1979, but here we are. The job is to get you over the line to join them. So, you were not on Top Gun, but I believe you've worked with Joe Kosinski before on it's slipping my mind, the Chris Hemsworth movie.
Spiderhead. Actually, yeah, and actually I was on Top Gun. I jumped on to help them out. That's where I met Joe. I jumped on to help them
Okay.
out for about 5 or 6 months as they were kind of wrapping up production and to kind of help get them. That was a project where it the way it was being shot and the way the material was being gathered together, it started to like become really massive. And Eddie Hamilton, the editor, needed some help and reached out, and so I jumped on and that experience really helped me a lot in terms of coming into F1, in terms of just understanding the massive job my crew would need to do to organize everything, especially all the material that we weren't generating, the material that was being, the thousands of hours being generated by the Formula One broadcast. And, you know, specifically in the sense that I wanted to make sure that what happened when I came on to Top Gun, like if I ever needed to bring anybody on to F1, that they would be able to find their way through. Because what happened on Top Gun is at a certain point, just again, it just the way they were shooting it, they were just grabbing whatever they could, and with all the cameras on the planes and everything, it became a real huge monumental job just finding the material you needed for any particular moment. So we went into F1 with my crew really understanding, like, I want, if something happens to me, if I disappear, or regardless, if we just need to bring someone in because we need to move quickly, I want this project to operate function in a way that anybody can kind of come in and find their way through.
Well, tell me about that process. I know from talking to the sound team that this was very much getting edited as it went, and they were getting scenes well before when they normally would in the course of a production.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that, working with Joe and just my experience on other heavy visual effects movies is knowing that the sooner you can start turning sequences over and shots over, the sooner you can start to get a sense of what they're actually going to look like. And we, even though we got hit with the actors strike and kind of shutting us down, shooting with our actors, we were able to continue shooting with our stunt drivers and continue gathering
Mhm.
material at each of the races along the way. So what that meant was I was able to put things together with Joe, combining, shots from our storyboards, essentially sketching out, doing like a first pass of all the races to make sure the storytelling was working. And also just planning those shots out, finding those pieces that we were going to steal from the Formula One broadcast, finding the pieces from our stunt material, and having those in a good enough shape to turn those over to visual effects and to sound so that they could start the massive job that they had, which was taking all of our blueprints of how that stuff was supposed to make sense and actually making it look right and make sense. Yeah, and that was in some cases a year and a half process from when we turned things over to when we actually, finished final shots on some of these things.
So you mentioned stealing from the Formula One broadcast.
Yeah.
I know that some of the film was filmed during real races, but tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Right. And when I say stealing, I don't mean literally stealing because we had permission. That we were all part of the same.
Yeah, I'm a lawyer in my day
Yeah,
job, so
exactly.
yeah, but
So
continue.
so the plan, and this was Joe's idea. And when he first told me, I said, "This is crazy. How am I gonna? It's gonna be hard enough just to keep track of all our production footage. How am I going to keep track of 20 cameras around the track for 4 days of racing? How are we going to organize? Like, how am I even going to know where to begin? So, so when I realized that this was actually going to happen, like I mentioned before, we just came up with a system, and that system um, developed and we evolved that that system evolved as we were going through the process. But our we had a DIT, Chris Nunn, who um, he would travel with production and set up with all of his recorders in the kind of control room of Formula One, and so he had a direct uncompressed 4K feed from all those cameras that are around the track, and so he would record all of those, get those then a compressed version of those. And what I came up with was let's make those little tiny like 720p files that my whole crew, my first assistant, Matt Sweat, who was on location with Joe, that we could access those all on a cloud drive. So our avids all pointed to this cloud drive, and then I could go through and pick and find the pieces we could catalog, so that I could, if I needed to search for a Ferrari passing a Red Bull at a particular turn at a particular track, I could track all that stuff down and find
Oh,
it.
that's cool.
Yeah. And then I could incorporate that into our cut, knowing that either I'm going to keep the Ferrari, or I'm going to change that to one of our Apex cars, doing the fight with the Red Bull, for example. Um, um, and then once I had that and I had kind of settled into what that piece would be, then my team would go back to the 4K and pull in a higher resolution image of it. It's a very similar process to if you're, doing visual effects. You have your plate and then they do their work and then you pull it in, with some handles. So but in the meantime, as we're pulling those things in, another thing that we were doing in order to, because sometimes I would cut a scene together and then a day or two would go by and I'd show it to Joe and I would forget like what's happening because you're imagining all these things that are happening in the frame and I would forget, wait, which car is which. So, but we would have labels. These little floating labels that we would attach to the cars so you could see who's the driver, what team it is, et cetera. Anyway, this is how we kind of slowly started to create this sketch of what the race would be and what the shots would be. And once we felt confident about a piece or a string of these shots, then we would turn them over to visual effects and they would start to actually reskin the cars, change those things. Yeah.
Well, that's incredibly cool, and that sounds like a pretty innovative process. I am sure F1 junkies were pleased about this. I think I read you're not really at least before this, not an
No,
F1 fan, right?
no, exactly. And Joe had told me, "Hey, you should watch Drive to Survive," and I started to, and I, it's a great show, but for me, I realized as I was watching it, like I don't want to get influenced by the style or the vocabulary of how that show is presented. I didn't want to either do things because I had seen them do it that way, or not do things because I had seen them do it that. Like I just wanted the stuff that Joe and the team were getting to be the thing that influenced me. And so I never felt any kind of handcuffs of like, oh, I shouldn't do this or I shouldn't do that. I let Joe be the arbiter of that. And so, um, and I also I knew it was really important that this movie makes sense to people like me who don't know anything
Mm.
about Formula One racing. So again, it became for me, just in terms of the storytelling, an advantage to not know too much, to make sure that any rules, anything that was critical to knowing whether our characters were winning or losing or gaining or losing ground, that all came from our storytelling and not from studying for years and years, because the amount of information that Formula One fans have is just enormous, and there's no
Right.
way you could actually fill all that in for all the people that should be able to enjoy this movie, even if they know nothing.
Now, one thing I thought was interesting is it's a very fast-paced movie, and it is, I guess, a movie that is has quick edits. But I've seen some race films where they're just full on like rapid fire cuts. This lets, I feel like, individual shots breathe a little bit more, and so I was curious about some of the decision making behind, I guess, how long to linger on shots versus trying to just bury you in edits.
Right. Well, the biggest factor in making that decision is I could. A lot
Mm,
of other movies I've worked on as well, the reason you sometimes have to do that in terms of a quick flash of something just to make you feel it is because you can't show it.
mm,
You don't actually have the drivers driving in the car at that speed, going past other, in other words, it's the kind of cheating that goes along with movie making and the creating that illusion. And sometimes the only way to create that illusion is with these kind of flash cutting of things that you then in your head start to put together. I didn't have to do that because I had all the material.
mm.
Anytime I wanted to see something, I had it for real. And if I didn't, I could ask Joe, "Hey, can you grab me a shot of the upgrade, for example? Just can you attach the camera so that I can see the upgrade as it's going down this particular straight at Abu Dhabi?" And of course, they did it, and I'm able to insert that into the piece. So part of that came from just the the way they shot it, and in general, I found that what I ended up doing more so was cutting everything around it to have that same energy, or not energy, but the same attitude, right? Which
Yeah.
to me is I feel like the cutting in this movie has a very similar attitude of the character of Sonny Hayes. It's glimpsing things. It's being kind of ahead of yourself sometimes. But with the racing, I was so careful and tried to really be disciplined in terms of making sure that you were never lost, that we were never pulling a trick to make you feel something that we weren't actually doing or actually showing. And I think that again, it was just because of the 5,000 hours of footage. That's what gave me the ability to do that.
5,000 hours. I cannot imagine having to sift through that. It- I mean, I know it helped that it wasn't all getting dumped on you at once,
Sure.
but how did you even begin to start keeping track of?
Right. Well, again, that's the beauty of how movies are made and the organization of it. Like a scene has specific elements that are just for that scene, and it's one of the big differences, for example, between Top Gun and this movie. An advantage I had was if I'm going to use a particular piece of material, it has to be at that track on that turn
Mm,
at this time of day, with the sun in the right place and all of that. For Top Gun, a jet going by there are no landmarks. So you you
yeah.
you literally can comb through every take for every piece of anything to grab and kind of grab a moment. So in that sense, everything was compartmentalized, and then so it was just a matter of digging down into the minutia of, okay, now I need to just be looking at everything for this particular moment. So yes, even though it's an enormous amount of material, a lot of that came from having 9 cameras going at once attached to 2 cars going around in those laps. Obviously, I'm not going to be looking at or using every single, frame of those cameras, but it gave me the ability of when I did need something, I had choices. And
Yeah.
that's kind of there's always this balance as an editor. You want to have infinite choices because you want to be able to do anything you want. But the minute you get those infinite choices, at least for me, as an artist, I start trying to, how can I limit my choices? Because otherwise you just get paralyzed
Yeah.
and you can't move forward. So for me, that's what it was. It just became about, okay, how are we going to tell the story of this race? What kind of cameras are we going to use here? And so again, it was a matter of trying to find ways to like push other things out. So I wasn't even paying attention to them until I had to.
Last question. This is a film I think that prided itself in having a very robust original soundtrack, not only Hans Zimmer's score, but also quite a few songs by major artists that you had to work in. Tell me a little bit about your involvement both with um, Hans's score and then also working in some of those original songs that were recorded for this film.
Yeah, no, it was a great gift to being able to bring all the artists in early, having Hans started really when we started shooting, and it was a 2 year process really. Yeah, I mean, we did our usual where we start with just putting in pieces of temp, things that we think will kind of point the artist in the right direction. And the advantage for us, again, was being able to send things out early.
Mm.
Being able to, we had we're cutting out of Jerry Bruckheimer's facility. We have a screening room there. So we'd be cutting scenes. We'd have artists scheduled to come in, every other day, and we would just be screening pieces of scenes and pieces of the movie for them to see what their interest was, to see, and so that they could just start, they could just get to work. And there was a great team, both with the source music, I would say, that were just working really hard to give us lots and lots of choices until we kind of settled with something, and then Joe and that team being able to kind of move forward creatively with them. And then yeah, with Hans, it's always it's that kind of back and forth iterative process of they would start with something and then we would take it and we might take it and break it and try it in other spots and go back and forth. And yeah, Chris Newland, who was our music editor, he, along with Hans's team, just did a tremendous job of helping us kind of go back and forth and find that pretty early. Because, I would say we were fully expecting, based on our schedule, that we wouldn't really be getting final music until as we were going into our final dub, which was
Mm.
up against the deadline of our release. But again, we just, because we knew we had so many things working against us with the schedule, everything we were trying to really front load a lot of things we were doing, and Hans also got ahead of that. So we actually went into our mix having already screened the movie for an audience with all of Hans's music in its final form, which
Wow.
was really really that's a really a great position to be in terms of confidence going into your final mix.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This really, I'm sure you've heard it, but this is just spectacular work, and I had such a great
Thank
time watching it. So,
thank you.
uh, best of luck with nominations, and we'll see how everything goes. Thanks so
All right.
much.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a robust team here. I know we've got Gary Rizzo. I know we've got Juan Peralta. Can I get the names of everyone who's sitting on the couch over there too?
I'm Gwen Whittle.
Al Nelson, Gareth John.
Okay. Gwen, I know we've talked before back on Way of Water. Um, and Gary, I guarantee you we've talked before about something. For the life of me, I can't remember what. A couple years back, I did that. I did a whole rundown of trying to figure out everyone who had ever made the sound bake-offs back when they merged the
Oh,
categories. So
sure,
I
sure, sure.
interviewed Ben Burt and Richard Anderson, and everyone. I think I might have talked to you about those, but
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure you're right on that.
yeah, yeah. So well, thank you all for chatting. This is remains one of the more memorable Sonic experiences I've had this year.
Great.
And so I want to make sure I know everybody's job titles in this one. So, who's the production sound mixer on this?
I was the production sound mixer.
All right. So we got production sound there, re-recording mixers.
That's myself and Juan Peralta.
Okay. And then supervising sound editors are
Gwen, words, Al, noises.
okay. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So, this is a an almost overwhelming production. So I guess the first thing to go with is I think I read somewhere that no movie has ever, because of legal reasons, been able to capture the sounds of an F1 race before. Is that correct?
That is correct. When F1 was owned by a person named Bernie Eccleston, he owned all the rights to Formula One, and he treated Formula One as a boutique kind of product, and it was you could get access to it, but it would cost you millions of dollars. So therefore, nobody was willing to do that. Uh, Once he stepped down and Formula One got bought out by I forget the name of what company bought it. It opened it up to more access, and that's when Drive to Survive came out on Netflix.
Hmm.
Once that transfer of power happened in Formula One, then it was easier to get access, and then Drive to Survive came out, scripts started getting developed, and here we are with this movie.
So you're pretty much plumbing uncharted territory, at least in the context of a narrative feature, then.
Yes, exactly. Especially with these sounds and with these cars, with the sport in general. This was all basically, I mean, there have been movies done about Formula One in old past, like period pieces in the 70s or
Grand,
60s and
Grand
stuff like
Prix is probably the most
yeah.
right.
And Grand Prix was
Yes.
in the 60s.
Yeah.
So but current day Formula One cars, this is the first movie for sure.
So you talked to Joe Kosinski, who I mean, everyone knows from Top Gun. He similarly had a very immersive soundscape, and my understanding is he is kind of involved from the very start with how his films are going to sound. Is that accurate?
That's 100% accurate. Joe gratefully really understands that sound is an important part of the whole film experience. And he and Jerry Bruckheimer want to make a cinematic experience, and they want it to be made for the theater. So they bring us on very early from the script, and they invest us in the process from the script, understanding that a lot of the things that are going to happen on production with Gareth and his team are also beneficial to us in post-production. And so he makes sure that we get access to the tracks and the garages, and allows us to communicate with Lewis Hamilton, who is a producer as well as a seven-time award-winning Grand Prix champion. So he really he makes sure that we can be involved throughout.
Well, you've given me a great segue for both you and Gareth. There's a lot of authentic sounds captured from the tracks, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
So talk to me about the experience, I guess, of miking up these cars that I'm not even sure how you do that without destroying the mics, blowing out the sound, everything. I'd love to just kind of hear about that process generally.
We did destroy a couple of mics. I'm honest. We managed a couple. I mean, that's it gets quite hot on the engines and the exhaust. So we'd sometimes use Kevlar heat shields, and we'd wrap the transmitters in there. So there were various lengths that we had to go to sort of make sure that we didn't destroy all of the equipment. But yeah, I mean, it was a sonic challenge, really. I mean, there was so much amazing stuff to record everywhere you looked. There was, cars, garages, drivers. I mean, it was, it's kind of sound recording dream, really. I mean, the world that you're exposed to and given the opportunity to put your mics and capture that stuff, it's a sound recorder's dream.
And also to clarify that our drivers, who are our actors, were race car drivers. Brad Pitt and Damson Idris drove at 160 plus miles an hour on all of these tracks. I mean, they performed and acted while pulling G's. But the thing to note is that the cars that they are driving are Formula 2 cars. The only people that can drive Formula 1 cars are, 20 people in the world. You really have to have been doing it since you were 6 years old. And so what Mercedes and the F1 organization did was they developed a Formula 2 car with a Formula 1 body that Damson and Brad could drive. But what that meant was that they're completely different sounding cars, that we had to replace every single sound that our production cars made. And so that meant going to every corner of every track, every straight, every pit, every garage, and also getting underneath the hood of these cars so that we could replace and authentically reproduce the experience of Formula One in a theater.
Oh my God. And then Gwendolyn, I mean, they're speaking obviously, so we're getting audio or we're getting dialogue, needs to be clean dialogue for Brad and Dimson, since they're the stars and we do see them driving. So I'm curious about trying to work with whatever you captured from their vocals on set and how you kind of recreated that dialogue at a later point.
I have to say the production dialogue team owes so much to Gareth because it was so well recorded in crazy circumstances. You got crowds, you got music, you got announcers, you got all this chaos of a real race plus cars going around, and he was still able to capture production dialogue that was completely usable. We did very, very little ADR. I mean, I think it also helps that a lot of it was on a mic, and it was okay for it to blow up every now and then because that's what happens in the real broadcast. So it didn't have to be. We were okay with the crunchiness of it, but even the other. I mean, there was maybe one scene that was completely ADR'd because there's just no. It was the beginning of Silverstone when they're talking because there's a production of music and announcers, and there was just no way around it. But all the other scenes, they just did a killer job. Thank you,
Gary. Yeah. Gary and Juan. I saw someone on, I think, Reddit say that this was the first time they had seen a film involving racing where they felt like the commentators were actually mixed in a way that felt authentic. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if it's accurate, but I know you use the film used the actual F1 commentators, right? So I'd love to know a little bit about mixing them in a way that sounded apparently very authentic if you're a F1 fan.
Well, that was
Sure.
Gary. That was all Gary. So I've been watching Formula One for a long time, and I'm just used to hearing it on TV. And when we started the premixes, Gary told me, "Hey, I'm going to try something with this, the announcers." I'm like, "Oh yeah, what are you going to do?" I said, "Well, I'm thinking we're going to put them like they're in the stadium." I'm like, "I don't think I've ever heard it like that." Yeah, I would love to hear that. And he called me in once he had set it all up, which was a big thing, and it sounded incredible. It was like all the reverb and all the delays and the bouncing all over. It was incredible. But Gary, please.
It was a total spitballing moment in that I'm not an F1 fan per se. I knew about the sport. Juan was the hardcore Formula One fan, lifelong, and I certainly didn't want to disappoint the fans. So, like, Juan was always the first go-to, the first question of, can we get away with this? Can we try this? And that initial response that he gave was, I found really interesting, because it was a contextual answer of, yes, you are so accustomed to hearing these voices and attaching these voices to this sport, and it makes it authentic. It solidifies the authenticity of it. At the same time, the fans were hearing it in a way that they hadn't contextually heard it before, which made it a little bit more exciting. So although a little bit of a gamble, Juan's knee-jerk reaction kind of made me confident in that we could totally pull this off. And the nice thing about the collaborations that I've had with Juan over the years, not just on this film, is the back and forth that he and I have in terms of figuring out what is important within the context of the mix at any given moment. So yes, we certainly have to get some of this narrative through with these announcer voices. At the same time, there are other moments when they're trailing off, or it's just their energy that's important, and we have to have the cars, or we got to have the score play, right on the heels of it. We're always making a million different decisions sonically to figure out what is the right choice for any given moment in the film. And he and I have developed over the years a shorthand that goes with it, and that shorthand works with Joe. We've been working with Joe for so many years. It's funny that early on, Will, you said everybody knows Joe because of Top Gun. That actually surprised me, because when I think of Joe Kosinski, I think of Tron Legacy, and I think of Oblivion. That's the era when we first met Joe. So I actually think the Top Gun era, as fantastic as that is, and kudos to, Al and everybody that won the Oscar for Top Gun. Like, it's funny because our history with Joe goes even further back than that. So that is the shorthand with Joe is there, and that's a crew wide as well. I think Gwen and Al would agree. And I will say, I have to show a lot of appreciation to Al, because he did an initial first pass of that PA and the concept, kind of a proof of concept that would work very, very early on, before we even did much editorial or much pre-mixing or getting into our temp mix schedule. That is where really we started spreading out the arena and really making it immersive and making it that real world experience. And I have to say, thank goodness we have a format like Dolby Atmos, because that was what enabled the PA and the real world perspective and context of the announcers to play just as clear, but uniquely different spatially from how the rest of the dialogue plays. You have your drivers and the team leaders that are speaking traditionally from the center channel speaker, but that PA, when it's playing stadium oriented, exterior, bouncing around, it really plays just as clear, but in a very different perspective.
Al, he's begging you to jump in and expand on that. So I want to hear about building out this stadium world as he's describing it.
Again, the wonderful thing about getting to participate early in this process of crafting the film is that these scenes are coming in, and Joe and Stephen Mariani, the picture editor, are working in the edit, and they're constructing these scenes. And they're very busy. Stephen had more footage on this film than he had ever had before, way more than even Top Gun Maverick, just cameras everywhere, as well as the F1 cameras. So they were really under the gun to just start constructing the scenes. So sound was a novelty that they didn't have time for. So they would send scenes to us very early on while they were still shooting. And a lot of it was because the cars weren't accurate. They wouldn't have any sound for the cars. So they'd send it to us. They'd say, we need sound for the cars because we need to know how to cut it with sound. And then they would also send the voiceovers, and they just wanted, they were constantly playing it for Jerry and playing it for Brad and playing it for people to weigh in on it and say, this is where we're going. This is the direction we're going. Can you give us a rough pass? And so I would do a very remedial job at putting the voices, and a lot of it I inherited from the picture editor as well, but trying to get it close. And then thankfully, you put it in the hands of a proper mixer who knows what they're doing. And we did our first temp mix with only a portion of the movie in the fall. And Joe wanted to do our first temp mix in Atmos, which is rare. Normally, you're kind of moving fast and you don't really have the luxury of putting things in the ceiling and all around. And but Joe wanted to know, what's it going to be like at the end when we get into a final mix? And we don't want to open up that Atmos package late in the game and not understand how it's going to affect the overall film. So let's do this now. And so Gary Rizzo in one, and Gary starts with Led Zeppelin in Atmos, and it's a great experiment. And then we have Lee Diffie in Atmos announcing Daytona, and then Gary starts putting Croft and Brundle in the PA in Atmos, and Joe had amazing insights on, and we would take it into our big theater, the Stag Theater, Skywalker Sound, and we'd get to hear it in a really full room. And he'd say, I think it's a little too far back. Let's push it a little bit further forward. And the amount of detail and investment that Joe put in making sure that this was the exact experience he hoped for, but also just so collaborative. Gary, what if we did this? Gary would say, Joe, what if I did this? And this back and forth is why we ended up where we were, because we had that luxury.
There's one element I was really curious about, and this goes to you, Gwendolyn. This is a very international film, and I think when we pass, we hear sometimes dialogue that's spoken in multiple different languages, and I thought that was a great little detail. So it made it feel very authentic for what's a very global sport. I'd love to hear a little bit about that aspect, capturing kind of the international environments that a lot of these races take place in.
It's kind of cool because actually the cast, they're all able to speak with their own natural accents. Carries it with her Irish, Casper with his
Belgian, I think.
Dutch,
Yeah.
Damson with his British. So the fact that all those people from all those different places were able to speak freely and naturally set the tone for what F1 really is. It's international. And I noticed when I got to go to the F1 race in Las Vegas, which is of course in America, and I was sitting in the grandstands, just kind of getting the feel for what's there. And I heard very little English. I heard Spanish. I heard Italian. I heard, French. I heard almost everything but English. I thought, okay, well, if we're going to sweeten the production crowds, which, production crowds are, thousands of people. So my little loop group, I have 25. So that's sort of spice for the whole thing. I made sure that we had people with accents. We had people with different languages that could fill in those spots. And of course, obviously, if you're in Hungary, you have Hungarian, that kind of, when you go to the different places. But it was important to keep that international feel for the film.
It really was a wonderful bit of authenticity, so I love that. Almost out of time here, but a couple more questions. I gotta ask about working with the Hans Zimmer factor here. He has as always, a very energetic score that has its own rhythm, and obviously it's worked into the songs, but also has to be worked into the soundscapes. So Gary and Juan, this is, I think, first back to the two of you about working with the Hans score here.
That's Gary. Go for it.
I mean, Hans is arguably one of the greatest composers of all time. Forget our generation. He thinks like a director. He thinks like a member of the sound crew. He thinks like a composer as well. Like, he's got a brain that is working in multiple capacities in any given moment. He's thinking about the construction of the scene. He's thinking about the arc of the scene. He's thinking about the dynamic. Not only where do things need to rise and fall, but how are we getting from one point to another, and also thinking about within the other departments of sound, what else is happening here, and how can we make all these elements complementary to each other. Not only complementary elements within the score itself, but we know that there's going to be a car that's going to be coming by here. We know that we're going to be taking this curve here. We know that there's going to be some narrative that we have to get through here, that we have to allow to get through. He's the greatest, and he's thinking about all those things and then giving us all the tools that we might need. Even after thinking about all that, he doesn't just give us one single commitment to it. We need to be able to have some flexibility to be able to move some hits or to be able to move things out of the way as we need to. And I'll give kudos to our music editors who, have to make sure that all of the intention of Hans is communicated to us and brought to us, as well as our scoring mixer, Alan Meyerson, who is making sure that we've got everything split out the way that we would possibly need it, all while respecting the original intention that Hans has brought us. Not the first time that I've worked with Hans, but one of the great memories that I have of working with a Hans score. This one brought all the emotion that you could want, whether it's, the high tension of a high pressure, high stakes race, or whether it's, solemn hospital environment trauma. It's all there, and it's about the characters as well. Like, he's just one of the greats. I could go on, but I feel like what hasn't been said about Hans, and look, I've never worked before this film. I've never worked on a Jerry Bruckheimer film, and yet that relationship between Hans and Jerry is famous. Like, Jerry's name was just as big as George Lucas's name in my house growing up. So the fact that I got to participate on a film that had Jerry and Hans communicating with each other, and I got the result of those communications, what a gift. What a joy. And then to be able to integrate it into a sonic playground like Formula One with this crew, like, this was just the best of all worlds. To be able to have all of it, it's a wealth of riches. Where can we capitalize on the riches that we have? And Hans Zimmer was one of the biggest riches that we had.
I am sure if he listens to this, he'll be very moved to hear that. And
well, it's all truth. I mean, I don't feel like I'm embellishing. That's the crazy thing about it. It's like he's just that guy.
Well, thank you all so much. Like I said, just incredible work. And I have no doubt that you guys will make it to this year's Sound Bake Off, and I fully expect you to get nominated again this year. So,
no pressure.
Work.
Whoa.
Well, yeah, I'm the one that now I look bad if it doesn't happen. No, great work though. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat about it, and best of luck this season. Absolutely. Thanks.
Thanks, Will.
Happy holidays.
Nice to meet you, Ryan. Did you have fun at the Bake Off this weekend?
Always fun. Yeah, it's so great to see everyone's amazing work and catch up with old colleagues. And yeah, it's a good time, and it's a good reminder of the hard work everyone puts into presenting the work of their teams, which is really important. We all have the honor of representing thousands of people that put their heart and soul into this work, and so it's just it's great to see that and be able to talk about some of the stuff we do behind the scenes.
No, that's fantastic. I've made it multiple years in the past, but I wasn't in town this year, but I heard a lot of people who I talked to single out you guys as real. A lot of people had no idea certain things were CGI. So
that means so much. That was the goal. Absolutely. Yeah, we really wanted audiences to focus purely on the story, and it was sort of our goal that people didn't know we did anything at all. Like not a single shot was really the bar we were going for. So it's now to be able to talk about it, it's sort of the opposite of what we were hoping to do. But it's like I said at the beginning of the call, it's really important to be able to represent the team and showcase the amazing attention to detail that they put into trying to make that that goal come alive. And I think they did an amazing job. It's just it's really fun to be able to represent that stuff.
So how many VFX shots total were there in the film?
2,500. Yeah,
Wow.
2,500, which is about 100 more than Maverick, Top Gun Maverick. So it's a little bigger than the last big project with Joe, but very similar methodology. Obviously, we were taking a lot of the lessons we learned from what was successful in that way of integrating visual effects into stunts. Obviously, it was stunt flying that time around, but really trying to just push the bar and like I said, when we were in our reviews with Joe and multiple people in the room couldn't remember what we did or what was real and what wasn't, being as close to it as we were, then we knew we'd kind of hit that bar. Um, and just also just watching the sequences play. And even though we were focused heavily on the visual effects work, we would just sort of watch the story, and get kind of lost in that. And then you have to remind yourself, oh yeah, we were going through that to look for red tires and which ones we had to change. But we would sort of get lost in it. And those were both two moments where I felt, okay, I feel like we've got a good recipe here.
No, it's pretty incredible work when I read about the scale of what you guys had to do. So, um, one thing that shocked me to read about from the Bake Off was apparently, there's a lot of sequences that take place in rain and stormy days. And although
Mm,
there's a lot of actual racing, my understanding is that for safety reasons and practical filming abilities, they shot a lot of
yeah.
those scenes on just normal looking days without rain. And then you guys somehow created the illusion that these took place on stormy days. So tell me about that process.
Yeah, so the Monza sequence in Italy was one of the more complex sequences just because of the varied nature of how we put it together in the end. So, we set out in pre-production. We knew that it would likely not rain in Italy when we got there. It has in the past rained at that GP, so there was a chance that we would kind of get lucky and it would be wet when we arrived. But we knew pretty early on that that probably wasn't going to be the case. So we started developing a digital wet down process, which is basically the idea that we would, if we were forced to have dry photography that we were working on, we could digitally alter that, add all the tire spray, the water droplets shedding across the carbon fiber bodywork, obviously the wet down of the environment itself and all of the reflections that would occur in the surface. Um, the details around the racing line and what happens as it starts to dry out. It stays wet elsewhere, but there's sort of these like, tire lanes that start to dry out because of the cars going over and over. So all of that was really studied early on. And we did some tests to make sure we took some footage that was dry and we essentially altered it and made it look digitally wet. And it was really compelling and gave us a lot of confidence going into photography. So when we showed up to the racetrack and it was a beautiful Italian summer day, we weren't too surprised or caught off guard. What we ended up doing, that there's the notion of that goes through the process of wetting down the track through filming trucks that basically our special effects team can drive trucks around and wet the track down. The problem with that is that by the time the truck got all the way around to the start again, it would already start to dry out where they had been. So you'd never really be able to keep it wet. The other issue and the other sort of production limitation or racing limitation in general is that these cars, being the highly tuned race cars that they are, you really can't go from dry, wet on the same tire. It'll just start to tear the tire apart. There's certain
Mm.
compounds and patterns within the tires that are meant for dry, and others are meant for wet, and they're not really compatible. So we really had to stick to one or the other. And so we waited for we opted to just do what our test was, which is shoot it dry for wet, meaning shoot it dry and then digitally alter it to be wet later. We waited for the sun to go down, so we sort of got, a more of a ambient blue push of light rather than direct sunlight, which gave a good foundation for the work we were eventually going to do. And then we just got to filming the scene. And that was how that was handled. Now, there was another component of Monza that was also complicated, which is that we had to go back twice to get all the work that we wanted to do there, both in the 2023 and 2024 season. But when we came around to shooting the 2024 season, they moved Italy in the overall F1 schedule, and they were working on a major track upgrade. They were repaving the track. Long story short, we never were able to actually get back out there to film our cast in that location. And so we were able to shoot a lot of that material at Silverstone, which was sort of our home base in the UK. And then through a bunch of other data that we had acquired throughout the photography for visual effects purposes, we were able to digitally replace those backgrounds and make it look like they were in Italy, even though a bunch of those sequences, a bunch of those shots were filmed in Silverstone. So that sequence in Monza in particular, if you add the digital wet downs and altering that, and then changing the entire location and background and other shots, adding all the crowds, the signage, all the rival cars. There was just a big heavy lift by the team to pull all that off. So it's a fun one to talk about.
No, that's incredibly cool. So you mentioned incorporating, I guess, data that you had captured from footage you had to kind of reconstruct this. I heard generally you talked about that your team, I guess, scanned the tracks entirely so they could recreate them. Tell me about that a little bit.
Yeah, so, for a number of reasons, the primary reason, so Joe, our director, had the brilliant idea to use broadcast cameras and broadcast footage as a way to integrate the real races into the story, into the sequences. And those cameras, there's anywhere between 20 to 30 of them placed around every track that F1 tours around. The men and women that operate those cameras are absolute pros, and it looks extremely authentic because it is real racing, photography. But tracking those cameras when it comes to from a visual effects standpoint is really complicated because they have an immense zoom lenses on them, far more than anything we carry on our cinema camera kit. You can go from a postage stamp of a car coming around the corner and then zoom out to the entire world, and that car is like tiny in the background. And that creates a lot of complexities because you don't know where you are, and when we need to track the cameras in order to digitally alter the material, we need a really good sense of the world. So that drove our process of replacing cars in real race footage, replacing cars in our own stunt footage that we were doing, and all of the various altering and signage and crowds and other things that we were adding to this material required that we had a really detailed understanding of what those tracks were. So we had our team LiDAR scan the entire track, which was a multi-day process. They actually usually did it at night because we were filming during the day, so it's too dangerous to be on the track with race cars going around. So they would do it at night, and they basically just walked around the entire track all night long, scanning every 10 meters or so the entire world, and then all of that data is collected into a single file that gives you millimeter accurate details of every undulation in the track surface, where all of the the walls are, the grandstands, and all that. We also sent drones up and spiraled around the tracks, taking photographs. They gave us color information and texture data. So that, combined with some surveying that we did of the camera positions, which is basically just hitting the camera position with a laser, tying all that back into that data set. It's essentially just a massive data gathering operation that we're doing while we're out there, which allows our team to later have a really good understanding of where everything was and then be able to use that material. The other, really quickly, I'll just to tack onto that question, is when we're adding digital cars into the background of our shots or changing what our cars look like, these are really reflective objects that reflect the world. And so having that information of what that world looked like digitally so that it could reflect back into our CGI cars was really a critical component of how that all came together. So a lot of reasons why we did that. It was a big effort, but it was a critical foundation to the work we were doing.
Now, another that's incredibly cool. Another point that someone mentioned that I wasn't quite sure what you guys were referring to was I understand that there was some issue with I think it's Mercedes doesn't give you access to what the cars actually look like, so you had to recreate from references or something. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do, yeah. It was actually all the teams are operating these highly secret car designs during the race season, right? They evolve throughout the race season. They're constantly testing. They're applying new upgrades and things like that. And there was there was no question that we were not going to be able to scan them or get special access to those cars because they're just so proprietary.
Yeah.
So we didn't even ask. We didn't even ask. So instead, but at the same time, we need to digitally represent those cars, in our shots. So we had to know what they looked like. At a really high accurate level, because also there's fans of F1 that know what the side pod of a McLaren looks like, and they know how the liveries changed from race to race, and they know all those details. So it was, from an authenticity standpoint, it was really important that we captured all of that and portrayed it accurately in the movie. So the one thing we did have was press badges when we were out filming at the F1 races. And so we were able to go out on the grid walk, which is this really amazing kind of VIP experience prior to when the races start. And then also just having access in the pit lane during filming. We were able to shoot just photographs, try to get as much coverage of the other cars as we could, just like anyone in the press would be able to do. And then through all of those various photos, our team was able to essentially triangulate the shapes of and create an understanding for themselves of what these vehicles were. But it's something I'm really proud of, because when a McLaren or a particular driver of any of the teams shows up in any of the races in our movie, they are wearing the exact correct helmet that had the right pattern on it, and the car is in the correct livery, and everything is extremely authentic to what it really was in that particular race. So there's just a really high level of attention to detail there that I think is really exciting.
The CIA needs to employ you guys to the
It's
way
kind
you
of like
guys
that,
are.
yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. And
But
then
it's
kind
part
of
of the joy of it, it's the fun of it. Like, that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to, and that there's people, we talk about it while we're making the movie, the people online that are going to be picking these things apart and commenting on them and finding holes and gaps. And so we're sort of always in a struggle with trying to make everyone happy and not be able to find too much stuff. So it's kind of, that's the joy in it.
last question was, I know you and let's see, you got Nicholas Chevalier and Robert Harrington are VFX, but you got Keith Dawson, who's a special effects
Special effects supervisor.
supervisor.
Yeah.
And I know there was, for all the talk of the incredible CGI work you guys did, there was also a lot of in-camera racing work. So I was curious to hear about kind of the process of collaborating with Keith for certain things like cars getting flipped in those big, dangerous
Great question.
accidents.
That's a great question. So we really consider ourselves cousins, special effects and visual effects. We share the same goal, and we're trying to put together the same scenes together. So it was really a partnership, a very close partnership. And the way both Keith and I and the rest of our teams approach these sequences is with the belief that if we pick one particular technique and do it over and over and over and over again, the audience is going to start to understand how we did it, because we're showing it to them too much. It's like a magician that just does the same trick for you over and over again. Eventually, you're going to understand what's going on. So Keith and I worked really hard to leverage both of our areas of expertise, both in the practical world and the digital world, to take a particular sequence and break it down and take shots that are cut right up against each other and do them in completely different ways. Sometimes merging techniques, sometimes it's all practical, sometimes it's with very minor visual effects, sometimes it's almost all visual effects with some very minor practical support. So we're building and designing the way we're doing these shots in a way that tries to take that into account. So from that standpoint, we always start by asking, okay, what can we do in camera? What can we do practically? That's the first question. And that's where Keith comes to the table with, his expertise of the variety of things they brought to the table, which was for like launching the car hundreds of meters. They built this incredible pipe ramp that essentially would send the car down this pipe and fling it at just the right moment. And there was months and months of testing to figure out exactly how to weight the car so that it would spin properly and land where we wanted to, or remotely driven cars that the stunt driver could actually drive like a video game, and it was a car that looked like our APXGP car, that they could get the back end out and send it right into the wall. Lots of fireworks and fire and smoke and all the various sort of things you would expect. But we're always kind of in the same situation together. We're looking at a real reference of a real crash, something that Joe has selected as a way to, honor the sport, but also represent things as accurately as possible. So we always had a real incident that had occurred in the past that we're basing our work on, and then we break it down and try to figure out, who can do what and how we put it together. So it's a really strong collaboration, a really strong partnership, and it's sort of fundamental to how we like to approach this work, and how Joe likes to make his movies, which is having a very in-camera approach. There's also this, it extends beyond special effects and also sort of into the stunt world too, which is this notion that even if we are not, even if we don't have all our cars, or even if we're filming the incorrect car, the fact that we're filming something and we're out there and trying to create a foundation for the shot that's realistic is something that is a really strong belief, and really, I think, is one of the major components of why some of this work is so seamless.
It's incredible, and that's I think exactly why your reel stood out to people, and why I've heard really all year from
Oh, that means so much. Thank
people in
you.
the
Huge
VFX
team effort.
community. Yeah.
Huge team effort.
Well, good luck with the rest of this Oscar season, and whatever you're working on next, whatever Joe has in the pipeline. If you're coming back with him, I'm sure it's going to be great, and I can't wait to see it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. So appreciated.
Absolutely. All
All right.
right.
Cheers.